Hey everybody, Derek Panchuk here. I'm the co-founder of Elipsys. Thanks for joining us today on our free webinar, Everything You Wanted to Learn About Eye Tracking in 30 Minutes or Less. I'm excited to have you along today and share a little bit about what we're doing at Elipsys, but more importantly, share some info on why eye tracking is important in sports performance, specifically looking at basketball. So yeah, I'll get stuck right into it. Just let me get my screen sorted out here. There we go. Hopefully you're seeing that all right. So maybe the title's a bit of a misnomer. It's everything I wanted you to know about basketball in 30 minutes or less. I promise we'll try to get through this as quickly as we can, so that I'm not taking any more of your time. I will leave a little bit of time for questions at the end, though, if you are interested. Before we get going, if you haven't figured it out already, my name is Derek Panchuk. I'm one of the co-founders of Elipsys. By day, I am a skill acquisition specialist who helps coaches squeeze more learning into their practice sessions. By night, I am working on getting the startup going, along with a couple of co-founders of mine out of the University of North Carolina. Elipsys is a sports technology company that accelerates performance improvement by providing a window into what the athlete is seeing and thinking. So essentially, we're using emerging technologies and some existing technologies to help shed a light on sort of the unseen side of performance. So what people are seeing and what they're thinking while they're performing. Here's a quick breakdown of today's session. I'm going to go through some of this stuff at a fairly high level and fairly quickly. Feel free to jump in with any questions you like at the end. And yeah, hopefully it'll sort of give you all, I guess, a bit of a taste of what eye tracking is and what it can potentially do and why we bother looking at eye tracking at all. At the end of the day, I spent a lot of time over the last little while talking to people in the basketball world, and there's generally pretty good acknowledgement that vision is something that's kind of important for performance, but we don't really know what to do with it. And that's where I think there's a big opportunity for companies like us to come along and help see people or help people see a side of performance that they haven't seen before at the end of the day and why it matters. Let's get stuck into it, shall we? Uh, Probably the good place to start is, why do we bother looking at vision at all? And there's a lot of really good reasons for that, to be honest with you. And probably the most pertinent one is that the eyes are the dominant sense. You know, they're how we establish a relationship between ourselves and the environment, and they're kind of important. I've heard them called, they're basically almost like an extension of the brain in some ways. So they provide sort of a direct channel from the environment and world around us into the brain. Um, and there's been some studies out there that suggest that, you know, almost half of the different areas of the brain linked in some way to visual perception. So excuse me, it is kind of important. Um, and I've also heard some studies, and don't quote me on this one because I don't know how accurate it is, but like 80 to 85% of the information we perceive from the environment is visual in nature. So vision makes up a big part of what we do. And when we sort of think about how that relates to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, it becomes more clear why that's the case. This is something called the perception and action cycle. And basically, vision is important because we use vision to help influence and initiate movements through the environment. And as we're moving through the environment, our vision changes. So to put that into basketball context, you know, if we're playing a game and we see an open player, we start moving in that direction, that's going to change what we see. And so there's this constant sort of cycle going on between perception and action all the time. That's really important. Another reason is that there's strong links between vision and attention. So attention is basically our ability to bring into awareness areas of the environment at the exclusion of others. And there's lots of really interesting, well, I don't know if I'd call it interesting, but lots of research out there that shows that there's this strong link between where we're looking and what we're attending to. So it's almost like, there's a lot of different interpretations, but it's almost like a spotlight, right? And so we can, if we're moving our eyes, we're moving our spotlight of attention in different ways. And there's some really interesting links between how we move our eyes and what we're attending to. So I can be looking straight ahead and attending to something over there, but the minute I move my eyes, my attention will snap to wherever my eyes are going. So if we can see what somebody's looking at, we get an idea of where they're attending to. And this is what sort of this picture on the slide here shows. This is a classic study from Alfred Yarbus, and basically he gave people different instructions. He presented this picture, gave them different instructions about what to look at, or how they were supposed to interpret what they were looking at, and they found out that people look at environments very differently depending on the instructions that you give them. So basically, eye movements give us a window into people's intentions around what they're doing when they're performing different tasks. So that's some of the scientific background. I'll just quickly jump into eye tracking itself. So this is a bit of an old school look at eye tracking. This is from Joan Vickers' 1996 study looking at basketball. And this is a player wearing an eye tracker, getting ready to shoot at a hoop. A few different things to see here. So basically all eye trackers work sort of similar. They have some sort of camera that records the eyes, and a way to sort of visualize what somebody's seeing in front of you. We've come a long way since 1996. This is kind of the current standard of eye tracker we're looking at right now. There's a few different companies that work. This is in the space. Tobii is one of the leaders in the space. And this is their eye tracking glasses 3. You can sort of see there's a camera here in the center of the glasses that sort of records a first person point of view. And then there's a few sensors and a few cameras here that record information from the eye. It takes this information, moves it down to a battery pack onto a computer. And essentially what we're left with is a first person perspective on performance. Or the world sort of, I guess, as the person who's wearing the eye tracker sees it. And this is essentially what we get to see. So this is a frame of video from the scene camera in the eye tracker. And this is the gaze cursor. So this is basically where they're looking. So it takes the picture from the first person point of view and the information from the eyes, and we get this little overlay of a vision cursor on there. And as the person's eyes move and their head move, that starts to move in different ways. So essentially what eye tracking lets us do, and what's really cool about it, is we can step into a player's shoes. And if you remember sort of that link between attention and vision, we can start to see how they're attending to the environment and what they're thinking as they're performing. So what's really relevant and important for them when they're doing different things that they're doing out there. So eye tracking, one of the main areas it's been used in is around like consumer research. So looking at what people look at when they move into stores, and sort of where to place products on different shelves, those types of things, user interfaces, so how we interact with computers around us. But there's also been a lot of work in sports performance. And in that space, what we're really interested in is a few different types of eye movements. So there's lots of different ways that the eyes can move, but a few of those are sort of more relevant when we're talking about sports, and those are fixations, tracking, and saccades. Fixations are periods of time where the eye is relatively still. So the eye isn't moving, it's sort of focused on one space. And these are important because those are the periods in time where we're able to perceive information from the environment. So essentially it's getting processed by the brain. So something's happening in the brain that makes that information usable. So it's establishing a relationship between the person and the environment during these fixations. Tracking sort of works the same way, except we're fixating on a moving object. So the eye will be moving on an object that's relatively still. So if you sort of think about, following a pass or watching an opponent, those are the types of eye movements we look for. And the last one is saccades. So saccades are sort of quick jumps of the eye, and you can sort of see it in the little video here. The eye kind of jumps from one space to the other. And one of the things that's really interesting and cool about the visual system is that we don't actually perceive these little jumps in vision over time. Our brain sort of fills in the gaps a little bit by something called saccadic suppression. So when we're making these quick movements, our brain actually sort of switches off so we don't see this blurred image of the world around us, and sort of fills in the gaps between, this spot and this spot along the way. So this is sort of really what we're interested in when we're sort of putting these eye trackers on and looking at how people perform in different types of environments. And the eye trackers themselves have gotten pretty robust lately. So we can use them in a lot of different spaces to look at performance in lots of different situations. It used to be that you'd sort of people would be sort of limited with some of these earlier eye trackers, right? So the picture I showed you from the person wearing a helmet, obviously it's kind of big and bulky. It'd be hard to run around a gym wearing that type of equipment. It'd also be hard to get too far because there's these big long cables that attach from the eye tracking device back to sort of a recording center. So we had a big media stand when I originally started eye tracking in the early or late 90s, late 1990s. And so, but they've come a long way. So they basically, the way they're designed, other than the cable from the eye tracker into the recording unit, there's not a lot of constraints on what people could do. So we've used it in a lot of different situations. We've had, quarterbacks throwing footballs to receivers on the run, receivers wearing eye trackers when they're catching it, baseball players pitching, batting, done a lot of different stuff in basketball. You can sort of see here we've got sort of a free throw, a relatively steady environment, but we've also used, different situations with catch and shoot. And then you can actually use it sort of in gameplay. So this is a different eye tracking device from a study we did ages ago. But basically, this is just a layup, right? So we can use it in a lot of different places. They're pretty robust. They're not as fragile as they used to be, and they're not really intrusive. It takes a little bit of getting used to when players put the glasses on, but once they sort of get going, they quickly forget that it's there and just sort of go about doing their business. So that's why we study eye tracking, a little bit of how it works. Now let's sort of bring it back to basketball a little bit. And so there's lots and lots of interesting research that looks at perception and performance in sports. And basically, it sort of shows, and it's probably not too surprising, is that seeing the right thing at the right time is critical for performance. And in sporting situations, that sort of becomes more and more apparent because in a lot of fast-moving dynamic sports, information can appear and disappear relatively quickly. And if we miss it, we might miss an opportunity to act. So seeing the right thing at the right time is critical for performance. And we know that elite players see the game differently. And I think, regardless of what sport you're looking at, whether it's soccer, ice hockey, those types of things, there's always those players who don't look like they're the most physically gifted player in the world, but at the end of the day, because they're able to see the game differently and sort of pick up information in ways that other people don't and see opportunities that other athletes don't, they're able to sort of compete with players who are on paper physically more gifted to them, but maybe don't have sort of, I guess, the game IQ and game smarts that some of these, lesser physically gifted players might have along the way. And as a result of this research, and there's been some really, I guess, compelling studies that have looked at a lot of different research and sort of pulled out what are the things that set people apart. One of them is that elite athletes focus on the target sooner and maintain their focus on that spot longer. And this is particularly relevant when we're talking about basketball shooting, because we have to sort of aim at the target, and being able to focus and pick up that target, at the right time, and let our body sort of figure out what it needs to do in order to get the ball to the hoop is really important as well. And so this focus period of time is critical, and it's something that has come out in a lot of research. It's called the quiet eye, and it was originally studied by my PhD supervisor, Professor Joan Vickers, in 1996. And a good way to think about quiet eyes, it's the last good look a player has at the target before the critical moment of execution within their sport. So in the case of basketball shooting, for example, it's this sort of the point of no return starts to become when I start to extend my elbow up. I'm not going back. So quiet eye is the last fixation, or the last period my eyes were really steady and really focused on a target within the environment before I started extending my arm. And there's been a lot of work done in this space, but essentially what it shows is pretty much consistent with what Joan's early research showed in this space, is that quiet eye can be the difference between success and failure. It can also be the difference between being a really good shooter and a really great shooter. So elite players tend to have a quiet eye that starts earlier and lasts longer compared to lesser skilled players. So you can see this is data from her original study. Elite shooters, these are the ones sort of classified as shooters who shot better than 75% from the free throw line, had this quiet eye period, or this final fixation before sort of extending their elbow, of around 900 milliseconds, so just under a second, whereas players who were lesser skilled sort of clocked in at around 350 to 400 milliseconds. And so basically what it shows is that it's almost like this sort of aim small, miss small mentality. Better players lock in on the target earlier, and they maintain their fixation there longer before started executing the shot. And there's lots of different reasons for why that is important. One of them is probably that it helps establish a good connection between where I need to get the ball and what I need to do in order to get that. So it's really helping me coordinate and pull together my actions in that moment of execution and making sure that we can get it right. There's been so the early work was done sort of in the free throw space, and then there's been a lot of subsequent work that's looked at different types of shooting situations, and the quiet eye effect is still sort of there. The exact differences in durations in terms of how long that quiet eye is changes a fair bit. So we know that looking from the free throw to the jump shot, in the jump shot, a good quiet eye duration is somewhere in the 300 to 400 millisecond range. So it's how long does it take to sort of get the ball, eyes to target, focus, and then be able to execute. And so being able to get there a little bit earlier and maintain fixation there a little bit longer increases the likelihood that players are going to be able to score in those situations as well. And so really what it comes down to is this idea of eye discipline. I can sort of show you what it looks like here. So this is a clip from some of the work that we've been doing. Same player here. You can sort of see as he lifts the ball up, the eyes sort of become disengaged, or the focus gets taken off the hoop. Whereas when was more successful, the eyes sort of stay where they need to be when they're supposed to be. So in this situation, what we've identified is sort of just a quick opportunity here for a player to make a quick behavior change that they can use to inform or practice and try and shoot better at the end of the day. So the beautiful thing about eye tracking is that our perception and how we look at the environment is a little bit like a muscle. And like a muscle, we can actually go out there and train perception. And so one of the things that we at Elipsys call this is we call it a high-tech assessment with low-tech coaching or low-tech interventions. And so once we've figured out what a player needs to do, then we can come up with pretty easy to implement interventions or coaching approaches that shift the focus from the physical performance to the visual performance and help players understand how they can better establish that relationship between their vision and performance. And that can be, simple things like video review. All right. So putting things side by side and showing a player, okay, well, this is what you're doing when you're not shooting that well. This is what you're doing when you're shooting things better. What could we do? Coming up with different vision focused routines, getting coaches to cue things in different ways. There's been a fair bit of quiet eye training type of research done out there. And basically, this is sort of the process that they step people through, do some benchmarking. So and assessing to sort of figure out, okay, well, where are we at now? And then do some analysis to figure out, okay, well, where's the biggest opportunity and leverage point for this athlete to potentially change? And eye tracking is not a silver bullet. It's not something that everybody is going to benefit from, but there's lots of players, because they haven't seen this side of performance before, there's instantly going to be opportunities for them to try and improve their shooting just by having an understanding of what they're doing. And that comes through this video feedback, this quiet eye feedback process. We're basically sitting down with the player, walking them through things, showing them the numbers, and then sort of moving from there into a position where it's sort of thinking, okay, well, what are we actually going to go out there and work on and improve along the way? And then coming up with, I guess, deliberate and really mindful, thoughtful ways of bringing vision into the practice plans of athletes. So it sort of becomes more of a day-to-day focus as opposed to just something that they casually think about. And there's been some interesting research done in this space. The original study, which was done on varsity women's basketball team in the late 90s, but they found a 22% improvement in performance over a couple of seasons. There's a lot of different factors that go into that, and I don't think all of that is probably because of the visual training, but I think there are some substantial gains that we can sort of see in that space along those lines. So I think, quiet eye training is an area where we can really start to think about moving the needle in terms of how players are performing. The approach that we sort of take at Elipsys is pretty simple. I'll call it the AIM process, but basically we need to analyze. So this is a high-tech assessment, figure out what's going on. So analyze, identify, okay, well, what's the thing that we need to work on? What's our highest leverage lever that we can pull in this situation? And then it's about mastering. Let's go out there and let's figure out the best way to bring this into your training environment so that you can go out there and become the best shooter you can possibly be at the end of the day. The process of going from an assessment to an outcome like that is something that used to take a lot of time. So I've worked with a number of teams and done a number of projects in this space. And, one of the big gaps is that we would do an on-court shooting assessment with players. And then a week later, I'd be giving them feedback and data after crunching all the numbers and doing all the analysis manually, going through things frame by frame. So there's a bit of a gap. And, in sports, we've got short memories when it comes to things. And if we can't do things really quickly, it's a challenge. So one of the things that I'm really excited about that we're doing with Elipsys is basically automating this process. So we've got a lot going on here, but essentially we've got pose estimation, looking at what the player's actions are during the shooting, putting this together with the vision, and we can go from an assessment to an outcome or insight in near real time. So this is sort of an example of some of the summaries or profiles that we can pull together for players where we can give them, feedback in near real time to sort of show them, okay, well, this is what your visual profile looks like. these are some opportunities for you to go work on things. You can have that conversation on the court and then send players out there to go work on stuff right away. So we test, retest, iterate really quickly if we need to along the way. I sort of think taking that sort of long-term approach where we're sort of thinking, okay, well, this is what we're going to identify. This is how it's going to weave through some of the work that we're doing already. So, one of the things that I'm really excited about as well is the fact that, this doesn't really interrupt the normal flow of coaching sessions along the way. You can sort of incorporate it really quickly and just it's a matter of sort of changing some of the focus, pardon the pun, around what we're looking at, pardon the pun, during shooting workouts along the way. I'm a little bit biased, obviously, but I think there's a lot of untapped potential in terms of how understanding vision can improve performance along the way. And this is just a number of the different areas. We sort of already touched on the performance optimization. So figuring out, what does this player need to do, or what is their visual profile look like? How can we help them improve that? Oh, get rid of that. Is really important along the way. So this performance optimization piece, we've done some really cool research lately looking at how we can individualize feedback for athletes using different sort of machine learning algorithms. It's potentially got an interesting role in injury prevention and recovery. So we know that injuries aren't necessarily just physical as well. They can affect how people look and see the game. So, we can if we've got sort of baseline data from a player and they get injured, we can look at what impact that injury is having on their visual performance as well and see if that's potentially an avenue to help them through rehabilitation, talent ID and scouting. I mean, obviously trying to understand what a player's ceiling is a big challenge in sport, and doing visual assessments along with a lot of the physical assessments and workouts that get done in that space. We can sort of get a more holistic picture of what performance looks like and say, okay, well, here's a player who's got a lot of potential or a lot of untapped potential in terms of what they're doing with their shooting. They're shooting pretty well already, but they haven't got a great quiet eye. Can we bump that shooting up a fair bit by changing the focus from maybe some of the physical or technical capabilities to looking at like the perceptual and visual side of things. The next piece is the in-season consistency. All right, so it happens to even the best players. They'll be having a great year, and then all of a sudden they'll go into a bit of a slump. And I think one of the really interesting things about vision is that we can sort of look at this as potentially another cause of what's causing that slump. So if we've got again the baseline data in place and we player starts to struggle through the season, we can sort of put the glasses on them, do another workout and sort of say, okay, well, I'm seeing some differences here in terms of what you're doing, or we can rule it out and say, okay, well, the vision's fine. This is not the thread we need to pull on. And the last piece is like precision coaching. I think at the end of the day, I work really closely with coaches. One of the things that's really exciting for me is being able to empower them with more information. We focus a lot on the action side of the equation, but there's this whole perceptual piece that we haven't really looked at and tapped into. And so I think by giving creative coaches this information and arming them with a good understanding of what eye tracking does and how vision relates to performance, they can come up with some really fun and creative solutions for how to develop visual skill within the game. And I think that's about all I've got for you here today. I think I've managed to sort of keep myself under 30 minutes or very close to. If you want to get in touch and you want to learn more, I know this has sort of been like a high level look at visual perception in sports. Reach out. I'm a friendly guy, love to chat, love to talk shop. I'd love to hear what you sort of think about vision and perception and how it relates to basketball performance along the way. But check us out. We're on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, LinkedIn, our website, or you can reach me directly, Derek at ellipsystech.com, or just through info@ellipsystech.com. I think that all goes to me anyways. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for listening to me. Have a wonderful day.